I was working at an international airport in the terminal information booth when an American couple walked up to me with a confused look. They had just landed in Frankfurt, Germany, and they were holding a printed map they'd made at home. The wife pointed at it and said, "We're looking for a taxi. Where's the yellow cab stand?" I told her that most taxis here are white or silver, not yellow. She looked genuinely shocked. She said, "But they're supposed to be yellow. They're yellow everywhere." I realized in that moment that she actually thought yellow cabs were an international standard, not just a New York thing. The husband nodded along like this made perfect sense. I spent 10 minutes explaining that taxi colors vary by country, by city, sometimes even by company. What struck me wasn't that she was wrong. It was that she had never questioned it. This happens constantly. Americans travel abroad expecting things to work the same way they do at home. And when they don't, confusion hits like a wall. I started noticing patterns after that. It wasn't just clueless tourists. It was regular, smart people who just assumed the world worked one way. A businessman I met in Budapest told me he walked into a store and couldn't find the price tags. Everything was labeled, but not in the format he expected. Turns out, Europe often puts prices differently than America. Same information, completely different layout. He stood there for 5 minutes looking at a shelf of cheese, utterly lost, not understanding that he was looking at the exact information he needed. He just wasn't reading it right. Then there's the measurement thing. I watched an American woman in a London grocery store spend 10 minutes looking for 8 ounces of milk. The employee kept pointing at 1-liter bottles. Finally, the American asked, "But how many ounces is in a liter?" The employee stared at her blankly. Most of the world doesn't think in ounces. They think in milliliters or liters. Same amount of milk. Completely different language for measuring it. What's funny is, these aren't stupid people. They're just working with a different mental map. America is big enough that Americans can live their entire lives without needing to know how the rest of the world does things. You don't need to understand the metric system to be successful in Texas. You don't need to know what a 24-hour clock is to run a business in Ohio. But the moment you leave, that missing knowledge becomes really obvious. I've traveled enough and talked to enough people to know this isn't about intelligence. It's about how isolated American culture can be. America has its own measurements, its own time format, its own expectations about tipping and personal space, and how stores should be organized. And all of that works perfectly fine inside America. But outside, that internal logic suddenly doesn't apply anymore. The real reason Americans feel lost abroad isn't because they're lost. It's because they're trying to use an American instruction manual in a country that wrote the instructions in a completely different language. They're not seeing the information that's right in front of them because they're looking for it in the wrong format. These stories I'm about to tell you, they're not about people messing up. They're about people realizing that the world doesn't think like they do. And sometimes that realization is hilarious. Let me tell you about my friend Jake, who moved to Amsterdam for 6 months. On his first morning, he went to a local cafe to get coffee. He waited in line, ordered, and then went to sit down. The barista called him back. "You pay now," she said. He was confused. Where he's from, you get your stuff first, then you pay before you leave. In Amsterdam, you pay immediately when you order. Jake thought he could just grab the coffee and settle up later. The barista had to explain the whole system, and Jake felt like an idiot. But here's the thing. In America, the system changes from place to place. Some spots make you pay first. Some make you pay after. There's no universal rule. So he was working off experience that didn't apply. This gets worse with tipping. Jake sat down with his coffee and didn't leave a tip. The barista didn't say anything, but he noticed her watching him. Later, he asked another American living there, "Do people tip in Amsterdam?" The answer is no, not really. Sometimes a little, sometimes not. It's completely optional. In America, tipping is almost mandatory, and not tipping makes you look bad. But Jake had spent years tipping as an automatic habit. He felt guilty the whole morning about that coffee, even though he didn't do anything wrong by local standards. Then there's the thing about store hours. Jake wanted to go shopping on a Sunday afternoon. He showed up at a department store at 2 p.m. and found it closed. In his town back home, everything is open on Sunday. That's just how it works. But in many European countries, Sunday hours are shorter or shops are closed entirely. They have laws about it. He assumed the store was having a special closing or something. He checked his phone and realized half the shops in the downtown area were closed. He thought there was some kind of event he didn't know about. It was just a regular Sunday. He was reading his American experience onto a completely different system. Then there's my friend Sarah, who taught English in South Korea. On her first day, she brought her lunch to work. She started eating at her desk around noon. Her coworker looked shocked and asked her, "Are you not eating lunch with us?" Sarah assumed she could just eat at her desk like she did in her office back in Boston. But in South Korea, lunch is a communal event. You all go together. You eat together. It's part of the workday culture. Sarah eating alone at her desk was seen as cold, rude even. She didn't mean to be rude at all. She just didn't realize that eating lunch wasn't just about getting food in your body. It was about team bonding. She told me later that she had to completely rethink her breaks. In America, especially in many offices, you grab lunch when you want and eat where you want. It's individual choice. But in South Korea, the expectation is group. Same mealtime, same place, different country, completely different meaning. I also met a guy named Marcus who lived in India for a year. He told me about the first time he took a taxi in New Delhi. He got in the back seat and expected the driver to take him where he said, but there were no seat belts in the back. Marcus looked for them, couldn't find them, and asked the driver about it. The driver just laughed and said, "Nobody uses those." In the US, especially now, everyone thinks seat belts are essential. The law requires them. You'd never get in a car without fastening up. But in many other countries, that habit isn't as ingrained. Same car, different relationship with safety equipment. Marcus felt unsafe, like the taxi was broken or unsafe. The taxi was fine. It was just a different standard. Then Marcus went to a restaurant and faced another shock. He was the only one eating alone, and the servers kept asking him if something was wrong with his food. They seemed concerned that he was dining by himself. In India, eating is often a group activity. A solo diner looked unusual or sad to them. In America, eating alone at a restaurant is completely normal. Nobody even looks at you twice. Marcus realized he was reading discomfort and concern in the servers' faces, when really they were just trying to understand an unfamiliar situation. I talked to a woman named Lisa, who spent time in Germany, and she told me about the first time she went grocery shopping. She brought her own reusable bags, thinking she was being environmentally responsible like she does back in California. At the checkout, the cashier asked if she wanted bags. "I brought my own," Lisa said, smiling. The cashier then charged her for using the checkout counter space, charged her for plastic bags even though she didn't take them, and charged her separately for a grocery bag, even though Lisa had brought her own bags. Lisa was confused and upset until someone explained that in Germany, the system is designed so you either bring your own bags or you buy bags. The store doesn't provide them free with your purchase like they do in America. It's a different approach to waste and cost. The store wasn't being mean. Lisa just didn't understand the system. She was reading an American supermarket experience onto a German one. The water thing gets people too. I know 3 different Americans who were shocked that tap water in Germany tastes like nothing to them. They're used to the taste of chlorinated water from American municipal systems. German tap water is pure enough that it doesn't need that chemical taste. They thought something was wrong with it. One guy asked if it was purified too much, and if that meant there were no minerals. He was genuinely concerned he was drinking something weird. He just wasn't familiar with water that didn't have the slight chemical undertone he'd grown up with. Same substance, water. Completely different expectation based on what he'd experienced his whole life. I was working at a hotel in London. when an American guest came down to the front desk looking stressed. He said, "Your map is wrong. It shows the United States way too small." I showed him it was a normal world map. He insisted that America looked tiny compared to Europe on this map. What he didn't realize was that most world maps are distorted. The Mercator projection, which many of us learned in school, actually makes countries at the equator look smaller, and countries at higher latitudes look bigger. That's not a mistake. That's how the projection works. America isn't actually as massive as it looks on the standard map many Americans grow up seeing. But this guy had never learned about map projections. He genuinely thought the map was broken. His entire understanding of global geography was based on seeing America blown up in size compared to reality. Then there's the date format thing, which honestly might be the most confusing. I watched an American woman in Paris completely misread her hotel reservation. Her confirmation said 15/3 to 2024. She thought it meant the 15th of March until she checked with the front desk about her checkout time. She was leaving on the wrong day based on her misreading. Most of the world uses day, month, year. America uses month, day, year. Same numbers, completely different order. This woman had booked her entire trip wrong in her head. She wasn't stupid. She just defaulted to her own system, without even questioning that other systems exist. I met a history teacher from Ohio who went to Rome. He was genuinely surprised that Romans had a completely different historical perspective than Americans. He kept saying, "But when did Rome realize America was the most important country?" He was joking, kind of, but not entirely. He actually expected European history to center America. When he visited the Vatican, he was shocked that there wasn't more emphasis on America's relationship to Christianity. America is part of Christianity, obviously, but European churches have their own stories that go back much further. His entire education had centered America as the main player in world events. So when he saw European history, it felt off-center to him. Not wrong, just unfamiliar. A woman named Rebecca told me about traveling in Japan. She went into a restaurant and looked at the menu. Everything was listed in yen, which was fine. She did the math. The food was incredibly cheap. She ordered like 12 different dishes, thinking she'd save money. The waiter brought everything out. She realized pretty quickly that restaurant portions in Japan are much smaller than in America. In America, one entree can be enough for a whole meal and then some. In Japan, you order multiple small courses. She'd accidentally done it correctly, but for the wrong reasons. She was calculating dollars to yen and not thinking about portion sizes. She got what she paid for. It was just not what she expected based on American restaurant culture. Then there's the driving thing. My cousin went to Scotland and forgot which side of the road people drive on. He jumped in the rental car and started driving on the right side of the road, the American side. A car came straight at him. He panicked and swerved. He almost had a major accident before he realized his mistake. This is a huge one because it's literally life or death, but it also shows how deeply ingrained American infrastructure is in American brains. Driving on the right is so automatic that he forgot he wasn't in America. Once he switched to the left side, he said everything felt backwards and weird for the first hour, but then it became automatic. His brain could learn the new system. It just didn't expect to have to. I talked to a lawyer named David who went to Australia and made a cultural mistake at a bar. He was trying to be friendly and called a round of shots for some guys he just met. In America, this is a friendly, social thing to do. It shows you're cool and generous. In Australia, buying strangers drinks can be read differently. One of the guys said, "Why are you trying to show off?" David was genuinely confused. He was trying to be nice, but in Australian bar culture, doing something to draw attention to yourself like that can come off as trying too hard or being fake. David's gesture, which would have been normal in an American bar, landed wrong. He didn't know the unwritten rules. Here's another good one. A woman named Jennifer went to a restaurant in Berlin. She sat at a table, and another couple sat at the same table. She was shocked. In American restaurants, you sit at separate tables if you're separate parties. This is just what happens. But in Berlin and in many European cities, if a table has room, other parties sit there too. It's normal. You might eat your meal at the same table as strangers. Jennifer felt like the restaurant made a mistake, like she should have a private table. She didn't understand that this was just how it worked there. She eventually relaxed and had a nice conversation with the couple. But her first instinct was that something was wrong with the arrangement. Then there's languages, which is almost the opposite problem. My friend Tommy went to Spain expecting everyone to speak English. When they didn't, he got frustrated. He said, "Why doesn't anyone speak English here? But Spain has Spanish. America has English. Americans speak English everywhere. But Americans are actually unusual in how much of the world speaks English. In a lot of countries, if you want to be understood, you need to speak the local language." Tommy was working off an American assumption that English is universal, or at least common enough that you don't need to learn anything else. He spent his trip frustrated because nobody was meeting him halfway. But halfway from where? He was in Spain. Spanish is the language there. Tommy was the one visiting, not the other way around. He eventually learned some basic Spanish and had a much better trip. But his first instinct was to expect the world to speak his language. I knew a guy named Chris who stayed with a host family in France. On his first night, he came to dinner in shorts and a t-shirt. His host mother looked at him like he'd shown up naked. In his American town, you wear casual clothes to a family dinner. You're comfortable. You're relaxed. In this French home, you dressed up for dinner. It was a formal family event. Chris was horrified when he realized his mistake. He thought casual was fine everywhere. But casual means different things in different places. What's relaxed in one culture is disrespectful in another. Chris learned to dress more formally for dinner. Nobody said anything rude about his first night, but he definitely felt the judgment. Then there's the personal space thing. I have a friend named Monica who went to Italy and was constantly confused by how close people stood to each other. In America, especially Northern American culture, people maintain a big personal bubble. You stand at least a couple feet away from someone you just met. In Italy, people stand much closer. When Italians were just having a normal conversation next to her, she felt crowded. She kept backing away. The Italians probably thought she was cold or weird. Monica thought they were invading her space. Same conversation. Completely different comfort zones. Another friend, Derek, went to Japan and was invited to a traditional hot spring with his host family. He panicked. He didn't know the etiquette. His host family helped him figure it out. You get completely naked with strangers. In America, this is very uncomfortable. Your body is private. You shower alone or at most with a partner. The idea of bathing naked with strangers is shocking. But in Japan, this is totally normal. It's not sexual. It's just a bath. Derek was reading American shame about the body onto a Japanese cultural practice. Once he got in, it was fine. But his first instinct was to panic, because it didn't fit what he knew. I met a woman named Patricia, who went to a quiet residential street in Vienna. She was on the phone with her sister back home, just chatting away on the street. Her neighbor came out and asked her to be quiet. Patricia was shocked. They were outside, on a public street. She didn't think being loud outside was a problem. But in many European cities, there are actually quiet hours, even outside. After a certain time, you're not supposed to make a lot of noise. It's a community rule. Patricia thought her neighbor was being uptight, but she was just asking someone to follow the rules that everybody in her neighborhood knew about. Patricia was breaking an understood norm she didn't know existed. Then there's the queue thing. I watched an American man in a London train station get irritated because people weren't staying in neat, ordered lines. In America, we line up single file, very organized, very clear. You know who's ahead of you and who's behind you. In other places, people stand more casually, and there's a looser understanding of order. You're generally next when you arrived around the same time, but it's not written down. The American man thought he was skipping the line when nobody was. They just weren't thinking about it like he was. He was trying to apply American organization standards to a different approach. I know a girl named Vanessa who stayed with a host family in Thailand. On her second day, She complimented their beautiful crystal figurine collection. She said, "Those are so pretty. I love that one." The host family gave her one. Vanessa was horrified. She didn't want a gift. She was just making polite conversation. In American culture, compliments are often just small talk. You say something nice, but you're not expecting anything. In Thai culture, if you admire something, the polite thing to do is to offer it to you. The host family was being generous and following their cultural norm. Vanessa interpreted it as weird. She felt like she had to accept a gift for making conversation. She didn't understand that compliments can actually mean different things in different places. Here's one about money. A guy named Felix went to a restaurant in Brazil. The bill came and he did the math. He decided to leave a 20% tip because that's standard in America. But in Brazil, tips are much smaller. Maybe 5% if anything. The server was confused. They thought Felix had made a mistake. They tried to give the money back. Felix insisted, thinking he was being generous. But generosity isn't about the absolute amount. It's about what's normal. By Brazilian standards, Felix had tipped 3 or 4 times what was expected. The server was actually concerned he'd miscalculated. The gesture that felt right in America was completely wrong in Brazil. I met a photographer named Alex who went to India and kept getting invited to people's homes. She assumed it was because they wanted to spend time with her. But she later learned it's actually a cultural hospitality norm. People invite visitors to their homes because it's polite. It doesn't necessarily mean they want a long friendship. Alex was reading American friendship patterns onto Indian hospitality. In America, if someone invites you to their home, it's usually because they want to build a relationship with you. In India, it's just how you treat guests. Alex showed up more often than expected, and people had to gently establish boundaries. She wasn't reading the culture right. Then there's shoes. I've known several Americans who were shocked when asked to remove their shoes indoors in other countries. In many Asian and European homes, you remove your shoes. This is practical. Streets are dirty. Keep the dirt outside. But Americans often see homes as extensions of outside. You keep your shoes on unless you're about to get in bed. When an American walks into a German home still wearing shoes, the host is mildly horrified. It feels disrespectful. Same home. Completely different rules about who has jurisdiction over what's clean and what's dirty. I was at an airport in Paris when I watched an American family completely melt down about a train ticket. They'd bought tickets for the high-speed train and thought the reservation seats were automatic. Turns out, in Europe, you can buy a ticket and still not have a seat reserved. You have to reserve separately, and sometimes for an extra fee. The family had no idea. They got to the station, couldn't find their assigned seats because there were none assigned, and thought the ticket was fake or wrong. They didn't understand that the booking and the seat reservation were 2 different transactions. In America, if you buy a plane ticket, your seat is reserved. The system is built differently. The family felt scammed, but they just didn't know European rail systems work differently. My friend Nathan went to Germany and tried to use his American credit card everywhere. Most places wanted cash or needed him to insert his chip card differently than he was used to. In America, you swipe or tap. In Europe, you insert the chip and sometimes have to enter a PIN. Nathan's card system was different. He eventually figured it out, but he was frustrated for his first few days. The payment systems are built differently. His instinct about how to use a card didn't apply. Then there's the housing situation. A woman named Sophie moved to the UK for a job. She was looking at an apartment listing and saw it was a 2-bed flat. She assumed it meant 2 bedrooms. When she got there, it was indeed 2 bedrooms, but they were much smaller than American bedrooms. Plus, the closet space was basically non-existent. In America, bedrooms are spacious and often have big walk-in closets. British bedrooms are cozier. Sophie thought she was getting a different product than advertised, but the listing was accurate. The apartment was honestly described. Sophie was just expecting American standards for room size. Same description, different actual space. I heard about a guy named Marcus who went to a hostel in Barcelona. He got into a dorm room with 5 other people. He thought everyone was going to be quiet and respectful. But people from all over the world were there, all with different ideas about noise and schedule. People were coming and going at different hours. Someone's alarm went off at 4 a.m. People were talking. Marcus was frustrated. In a hostel, especially in tourist areas, there's a certain level of chaos. In America, hostel culture is less common, so Marcus didn't have the experience to know what to expect. He thought there would be hostel rules and everyone would follow them. But hostels are loosely organized social spaces. He was expecting hotel standards in a hostel. Then there's the food ordering situation. I know a lawyer named Kevin who went to Spain. He sat down at dinner and asked the waiter to explain every single dish in detail. What meats are in it? How is it prepared? What does it taste like? In America, you can usually figure out what a dish is from the description. Spanish cuisine has dishes Kevin had never heard of. Instead of being adventurous, he got frustrated that the menu wasn't explaining itself better. He wanted everything labeled clearly. The waiter was patient, but Kevin was treating Spanish cuisine like it should match his knowledge of American food. He was mad at Spanish food for not being familiar to him. I talked to a woman named Grace who went to a pharmacy in Mexico. She needed basic pain relief medication. In America, you can buy ibuprofen and acetaminophen at any store, even gas stations. In Mexico, some medications require a prescription or are behind the counter. Grace didn't know this. She wandered around the pharmacy looking for these medications on open shelves. She couldn't find them. She thought the pharmacy didn't have what she needed, but they did. It just worked differently. The pharmacist had to help her figure out the system. Same medicine, different rules about access. Here's a good travel one. A guy named Ethan went to Thailand and wanted to catch a train to another city. He showed up at the train station 30 minutes before departure. In America, you're supposed to show up early and go through security screening. But in Thailand, trains are much more casual. People were getting on right at the departure time. No security line. No early arrival requirement. Ethan spent time waiting in the station nervously, thinking he was cutting it close. But he was way earlier than he needed to be. He was reading American airport security rules onto a Thai train station. Same transportation. Completely different procedures and timing expectations. I met a teacher named Barbara who went to Morocco. She wanted to take a tour, so she showed up at the meeting spot 10 minutes early. The tour was supposed to start at 10 a.m. Nobody was there at 10:15. At 10:45, people started arriving. The tour started around 11:15. In American culture, especially professional settings, if you say 10 a.m., you mean 10 a.m. Being late is disrespectful. In Morocco, time is more flexible. 10 a.m. is more of a starting window than a hard line. Barbara was frustrated, thinking the tour operator was irresponsible. But this is just how time works in that culture. What feels like chaos in one place is normal flexibility in another. Then there's my friend Paul, who went to South Korea and was completely confused by public restroom etiquette. He walked into a stall and couldn't find the toilet paper. He was looking everywhere. A woman came by and asked if he needed help. She pointed to a spray function on the toilet. Different countries have different bathroom technologies. America uses toilet paper almost exclusively. Asia often uses water spray systems. Paul felt stupid for not knowing, but it wasn't on any travel guide he'd read. He had to be shown. Same function. Different technology. I knew a couple from Texas who went to a restaurant in rural France. The menu was entirely in French. One of them asked if they had a translation. The waiter said no, and then described some dishes. But his descriptions didn't match what the Americans expected. They ordered blindly and got something that shocked them. One got a dish with organs in it. The other got a raw preparation of meat that scared them. They didn't understand that restaurants in other countries sometimes serve ingredients that aren't common in American cuisine. They were expecting the menu to be a safety guide, keeping them away from unfamiliar stuff. But the menu just listed what was available. If you couldn't read it, you were taking a risk. That's just how it worked. The thing about all these stories is that they're not actually about people being confused or lost. They're about people working with one system and showing up in a place where a completely different system exists. And usually, both systems make sense within their own context. American coffee shops do work differently than Amsterdam ones. European maps do show the world differently than American textbooks. Nothing is wrong. It's just different. What's really interesting is what happens after people realize this. They don't stay confused forever. They adapt. Once Jake figured out the Amsterdam payment system, it became automatic. Once Sarah understood that lunch was group time in South Korea, she joined in and actually liked it better. The confusion isn't permanent. It's just the moment when someone realizes their internal map doesn't match the territory they're standing in. I think this is actually something America makes harder because America is so large and self-contained that you can go your whole life assuming the American way is the default. In a small country, you grow up knowing that the way you do things is local. In America, you can live 60 years and genuinely believe that how you measure distance, what time you eat, how you tip, and which side of the road you drive on are just how the world works. Then you leave and get a shock. But here's the thing. I've never met someone who stayed frustrated about this. People are actually pretty good at learning new systems once they understand the systems exist. The real problem is the assumption that there's only one system. That's what gets people confused. The American at the Frankfurt airport wasn't stupid. She just had never considered that taxi colors weren't universal. Once she learned they weren't, she could update her mental map. I think what's happening globally is that Americans are slowly starting to understand this. More people are traveling. More people are learning that their way is just one of many ways. And that's kind of cool when you think about it. It means the confusion these people felt isn't wasted. It's actually an education. They're learning that the world is bigger and stranger and more interesting than one instruction manual can describe. The Americans who feel most lost abroad are usually the ones who think they should never have been confused in the first place. But the Americans who do best are the ones who realize that confusion is information. It means you're learning. Your brain is updating. You're realizing that systems you thought were universal are actually cultural choices. And there's nothing wrong with that. Travel isn't really about going somewhere and keeping yourself the same. It's about letting the new place change how you think. The funniest stories aren't about Americans messing up. They're about Americans realizing for the first time that the world doesn't run on American logic. And that's actually pretty beautiful if you think about it. These moments of confusion are how people grow. Jake, Sarah, Marcus, and all the others, they came home different than they left. They understood that their way wasn't the only way. That's not a loss. That's an expansion. That's why people travel in the first place. So if you ever feel lost traveling abroad, remember, you're not actually lost. You just don't know the local system yet, but you can learn it. People have been learning how to operate in different systems forever. You're not special or stupid for needing a minute to figure it out. You're just human, and the world is way too big and interesting for any one system to cover.